Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, when a couple of soldiers were on leave, they were out partying and having a great old time, but as the night came to a close, they decided to call for a ride home. But with that call, when the car arrived, one of those soldiers had vanished. The search throughout that city was huge, but when the horrifying discovery was finally made, it seemed impossible. This is one of the tree stories I'm going to tell you in this old video, and you know, I'm not really a huge fan of the hyperbole, but truly you are not going to expect where this one goes. You know, this video is almost like a flip of the darkest disappearances I do, because in this one, it's not how they vanished that was horrifying, it's how they were found. But before we get into it, please subscribe to see new stories for the dark every single week now. Let's give it a go. It was late, on the night of April 16th, 2006, that two soldiers were out having a great old time out on the town. This was in Savannah, Georgia, a city which has by all accounts a great nightlife, so if you were looking to party, it would be the place to go. These two soldiers were from Fort Benning, now called Fort Moore, which is across the state of Georgia. It was Easter weekend, so they were in the port city of Savannah and they were having a great old time. One of these soldiers' names was Jeremy, and he was there with his pal, and they had been, through it all, through thick and through thin. The other soldier was Specialist Robert Hornbeck. Robert was 23 years of age, from Lapeer, Michigan. After graduating from high school, he went on to study at the University of Michigan before entering the military and serving in Iraq. In fact, both Robert and Jeremy had served together. They'd only returned home from their tour in January 2006, just a couple of months before this. And so in April of 2006, Robert Hornbeck was just about 2 weeks away from being discharged. After that, he was due to return home to Michigan, he was going to marry his sweetheart, and he was going to go back to school. So, he had a lot to look forward to, he was almost out of the army, and they were just having a great, it was a party weekend for them both. That April weekend, Jeremy and Robert were in Savannah to party. Robert, his uncle, lived in Savannah, and Robert's dad, Eric, was due to join them. So it was that Saturday night. Robert was there with his dad Eric. They were in a bar, they were sipping on suds, they were playing pool. Then, listen, in walks Jeremy, right? To people cheering their beers. Then Eric's wife comes in, all four of them are partying, they're bar hopping throughout Savannah. The drinks were flowing, the dance moves, they were boogieing. But, come about midnight, Robert's dad Eric and his wife, they're like, alright, listen. Time for the bet, right, for us. So we'll catch this later, but of course, Robert and Jeremy, the two young fellas, they were like, yeah, more drinks? Yes, please. So then, after hitting a few more bars throughout the city, it was at 3:15 a.m. that both Robert and Jeremy, as you could probably imagine, they kind of had to, walk like that in case any beer, falls out. Jeremy calls Robert's dad, Eric, to ask, hey, listen, we can't get a taxi or whatever, would you mind coming to come and get us. Robert was sitting beside him on the sidewalk and was, as you can imagine, we've all been there, or most of us have. Eric, Robert's dad, nice guy. I mean, hey, listen, being woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning to ask if you can pick up some drunk people, most people would have said, yeah, you can walk them. But he was a nice guy. So Eric, he walks out, he's walking towards his car, when his phone gets another call. This time it's from his own son, Robert, and he picks up the phone and is about to say, listen, I'm on my way to come get you, when he hears Robert say, I'm on the stairs, and then Robert hangs up. So Eric, just having a call from Jeremy to come pick him up, and then from Robert, he assumes Robert means, they were waiting for him on the stairs, you'll see us. Eric then drove and he arrived in his car to downtown Savannah about 15 minutes later to pick up the two young bucks. But it was only Jeremy waiting for him. Robert was nowhere to be found, so Eric asks, Jeremy, hey, where's my son? He was just right here with you. He just rang me saying he was on the stairs. Jeremy, pretty goose at this point, has no idea. He must have just stumbled off in a drunken stupor, it's 3:15 a.m. So Eric lets Jeremy into his car and they sort of begin just cruising around trying to find him. It was the absolute middle of the night, the hour of the wolf. The streets were deserted. And Robert, fairly drunk, so he couldn't have gotten very far. But they went up and down the avenues and streets, and he was nowhere to be seen. It really became worrisome after a while. They kept thinking, Robert will be around the next corner, or he'll be in the next alley, or we'll see him curled up in a ball on the sidewalk somewhere in not the best state. But they didn't. And the next morning, when you think Robert's going to be waking up, sleeping off a hangover where he probably fell asleep on somebody's, stairs, well, he didn't call them then. In fact, Robert had left his car outside his uncle, who lived in Savannah, his uncle's house, and his car was still there. It seemed like he never made it anywhere. This is when they became really worried, and Savannah, it's a port city, had he fallen into the water or something like that? The Hornbeck family, they hit the town, and the search for missing Robert began. The police became involved, posters went up, and they offered a $10,000 reward if anybody had seen him. The search for missing Robert Hornbeck very quickly became big news in this town. Days, and then over a week would pass by as they continued searching for young Robert. It was 12 days after his disappearance that some answers arrived. Only, in my opinion, the answers only led to more questions, and, well, it was completely baffling what happened to Robert Hornbeck. At the DeSoto Hilton Hotel in downtown Savannah, Georgia, guests staying at this hotel, they sort of began to complain about a smell in the lobby. The employees at this hotel, they sent out, their maintenance people and their cleaners to go, would you mind find the source of the smell? So they were looking around, was it dead animal, trash, whatever. They couldn't find it. They couldn't find where this really bad smell was emanating from until they just follow your nose. And it led them to the air conditioner vents. The smell was coming from the air conditioning itself. Now, this hotel had actually been searched before by the police, and also by Jeremy, who had been staying there, and the Hornbeck family. They hadn't found anything. Like, this hotel was downtown Savannah, it was close to where he disappeared, so they had popped in, but no trace of him. No trace of him here. So the maintenance worker, he goes into the back alleys of this very big hotel, through these twisting and winding maintenance corridors to, like, this industrial-sized air conditioning unit. It's really, really big. It's not like the individual units that the rooms might have, like one you would have in your apartment. This is one for the entire building. And it was a hike to get there, buried deep in this very old building. So he's walking through this very dark corridor, and he comes into the air conditioning room. So he goes into the room where the unit itself is, and there's 3 panels on it. And on the other side of those panels is, the fans and the blowers and such. He turns off the air conditioning unit and he whips out a flashlight, pushes through one of the panels that would lead into the interior of the unit. And in there he finds the smell to be the strongest. And he's kind of looking around, pitch black in there, so he's lighting his flashlight around. And then he begins to see a figure. A rotting figure. He called the police. An autopsy would confirm it was Robert Hornbeck, inside an air conditioner. He had somehow gotten into the air conditioning unit, the industrial-sized air conditioning unit of a hotel he was not even staying at. He had wandered in, pushed through these steel panels, and gone into the very unit itself. How he died was that he'd gone in there and the fans inside the unit had sliced off his arm and pinned him against a wall. He had died from blood loss. No one could explain how he had gotten in there. It was completely baffling. Even if you were staying at the hotel, there'd be absolutely no reason for you to be in the maintenance section. But yes, more so inside the physical unit itself. Hell no. A reporter, in fact, went to where this was, just to explain how impossible it is to accidentally enter an industrial-sized hotel aircon system. So first of all, the hotel was just across from where Jeremy and himself had been waiting for Eric to come pick him up. So for some reason, Robert wandered away from his buddy Jeremy. Dad was only a couple of minutes away. He wandered into this hotel across the road. Okay, maybe he was quite drunk. Maybe he's looking for like a hotel bar, that might still be open. Or something like that, or he just got confused. But then he would have to go through a maintenance store near the ballroom, which is off the lobby of the hotel. So wandering by, again, I know this is like 3 a.m. at night, but you still wander by quite a number of hotel employees at this stage into a very dark and quiet part of the hotel. The door to the maintenance hall was usually locked, but the police found no signs of forced entry, so maybe it had been left open, or at least that's what they assumed. Then you had to climb 13 very steep steps that are apparently almost a ladder. And remember, Robert was very, very drunk at this time, so he must have had, quite the woozies, but he still managed to get up there. Then he would have entered a dark hallway with the aircon system in a room on the left. Inside there were 3 panels on the unit. He went through the middle one, which was only 14 inches, 35 centimeters wide, and had big danger signs on it. He pushed through these metal panels into the unit, and then suddenly he would have been hit by an extremely strong gust of wind, ice cold wind, the unfiltered, air conditioning, and the noise would have been incredibly loud in there. There's basically a giant fan staring right at you that's pushing air all throughout this huge building. So he kept going through that pitch dark, incredibly windy, incredibly cold, incredibly loud unit until eventually the fan hit him and pinned him to the wall. I hear you barking, big dog. What? The Hornbeck family later sued the hotel, but the judge dismissed the case as the debt didn't result from anything the hotel did or didn't do. You simply couldn't expect, as a business liability, you simply could not expect somebody to find their way into an air conditioning unit. A, to find their way in, B, to go in. And he had been there for 12 days before they found him. People think that maybe he'd been drunk in a state, he'd just somehow wandered into the hotel and had been trying to find his way out of the hotel when he just kept going deeper and deeper and then thought, wow, how will I get out of here? I'll go into an air conditioner. Even at your drunkest, that doesn't make sense. I couldn't find any reports that detailed him having some kind of drugs in his system. Maybe he was under the influence of something stronger than alcohol. He had just come home from war. Maybe he had some kind of PTSD or something like that led him to want to do this. I simply don't know. Nobody knows. People are still asking what really happened to Robert Hornbeck. The police had even been around this area but didn't look into the air conditioning because, well, they thought nobody would possibly be in there. This is like Elisa Lam level of weirdness. Finding somebody dead in a part of the hotel they absolutely should not be. It's an extremely creepy, bizarre, unexplainable story, but hey, if you got any ideas, please let me know. And before we continue, mi amigos, let me tell you about this whole video's sponsor, and that is the amazing MyHeritage. I love these folks. They sent me a DNA test so I could find out about my own heritage. Like, legitimately, guys, I've never done a DNA test, a genealogy test, never done it, so I was fascinated. I couldn't wait to see what my results would be. Like, you guys know how good at accents I am. But is there any more to it? Let's find out together. It all begins with this kit I was sent by MyHeritage a few weeks ago, and it has everything you need to find out about yourself. It's all right here in this handy little box. It's super easy to use, only takes like a minute, and you do a little swabby on one cheek, a little swabby on the other cheek, you pack it all up and ship it to the return address. They get it to their lab, and then a few weeks later, you will receive an email in your inbox. They send you a percentage breakdown of your origins from 42 supported ethnicities across over 2,000 geographic regions, which, let's be honest, I think they got it covered. Alright, so time to check out old Mike's percentage breakdown. Alright, so here we go. I click my DNA results and let's see what I got. Michael, are you ready to explore your ethnicity? I guess so. Let's see where we goes. Alright, what do we got here? Michael, you are 98.7% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. Alright, interesting. Okay, I'm 1.3% Central Asian. Was not expecting that one. From Kazakhstan. Oh my god, I can do board impressions, right? Now, I can technically do board impressions. Full ethnicity estimate. I'm actually really surprised at that. You have 2 ethnicities and 5 genetic groups. Okay, and it starts matching me here with who I'm related to. So other people who are in the MyHeritage system, they'll come up. I have 1 close family member, that's my cousin, 12 extended family members, and 12,861 distant relatives. And so I can go through here and it shows me every person I'm related to and what that relationship is. And I can probably contact them, I guess, if I want. I mean, this is wild. We all have people in our family we're trying to, avoid. And now I've just got a whole lot more. New family. More Christmas presents? Question mark? Or how about uncovering some family secrets? Now we're talking. See, that's the thing about My Heritage. It isn't just, a platform for finding your own ethnic origins or where your people came from. It's also a platform to explore, research, and start to build out your own family tree. Also, super important to note is that My Heritage, in its private policy, has committed to never sell or license genetic data. So, your DNA and everything that they have, it's completely safe with them. It'll never end up in any place you don't want it to. So buy your DNA kit down in the description and use coupon code CHAPTER for free shipping. As an added bonus, you can start a 30-day free trial of MyHeritage's best subscription for family history research. It's super interesting. Honestly, I'd never seen anything like any of this before. It's wild to see all my DNA broken down, and I hope you enjoyed me sharing it with you. You are literally seeing it live as I found it, and ow. I got some questions. So once again, if you want to learn a little bit more about yourself and your family history, please use the link down in the description or in the pinned comment and use code CHAPTER to get free shipping. Please support My Heritage, learn more about your good self. Now, let's get back to the video. On May 8, 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddux told his big sister Kate that he was just going for a little hike around their home in Woodland Park, Colorado. He'd be back, in a couple of hours, or be back by that evening. His sister Kate thought nothing of it. This was something Joshua often did. He'd go off for hikes for hours at a time, but he'd be back eventually. No biggie. He'd always been an active and outdoorsy kind of kid, preferring to be out amongst the trees, exploring, and constantly pushing his own horizons further and further. Only Joshua didn't come back that evening. In fact, Joshua would never come home ever again. As well as being an explorer at heart, Joshua was also a creative kid. He loved to play music and write stories, often combining the two talents to write his own songs. He even created his own comic book called Stickman and Smiley. Everything about his personality screamed for adventure, and he also had a wicked sense of humor. Nobody had a bad word to say about Joshua. He's just one of those guys who could find kind of familiar ground with literally anybody, and you'd be, best buds. However, 2 years earlier, when Joshua was only 16, tragedy had hit the Maddux clan. See, Joshua, he was the youngest kid in his family. He had 2 older sisters, and he had an older brother named Zachary, but sadly Zachary took his own life when he was only 18 years of age. Joshua had always looked up to his older brother Zach, and so Zach's death hit Joshua the hardest. It hit the entire Maddux family extremely hard. His parents, Mike and Roberta, they would eventually divorce. But it was something that Joshua himself really was grieving for, and even 2 years later, when he was 18 himself, he was still grieving his older brother's passing. So at first, when Joshua went out that day for a walk, his family weren't kind of overly concerned. He'd be back soon. Almost everyone Joshua spent a significant amount of time with would tell you he couldn't wait to escape his small town and get out into the world. He was a free spirit, and his sister Kate recounted the many times that her little brother had talked about wanting to run away and begin a whole new life. He would often tell his family, I'll go away, for a while, but he'd always be back eventually. So when he left, that's kind of what they were thinking is, has he ran away? And they wouldn't blame him if he did. He was just that kind of guy. So while his sisters were convinced he had just moved away, and he's probably doing just fine, his dad, Mike, wasn't so convinced. In fact, his parents started to become more worried and more worried. As you can imagine, parents will always worry. But they began asking around his friends, you heard anything from him? Seen him? Tell you what he was doing? Nada. In fact, 5 days would pass and they still hadn't heard any word. Nobody had heard any word from Joshua, and that's when they reported the 18-year-old missing. Though the police did take this seriously, they also were sort of on the idea that he had absconded by himself, talking to his sisters and his friends and his family. It's like, yeah, that seems like something he would do. They took it seriously, but not as serious as if he was, quite a bit younger. But officers were notified to be on the lookout for Joshua, a 6-foot, 18-year-old, slim, at roughly 150 pounds, man with shoulder-length, dirty blonde hair. They also made sure to note he could be distressed over the loss of his brother, as well as a key distinguishing feature of Joshua's. He'd lost the tip of his index finger on his right hand, the result of a childhood cycling mishap. His description was put out and spread around the various agencies who would dot this part of Colorado. But the years began to pass by with no signs of Joshua. His dad, Mike, never stopped looking. He began to visit homeless shelters, further and further afield from their hometown of Woodland Park to see if anybody had seen or heard from him. His sisters, Kate and Ruth, they still were like, he'll turn up one day, he'll just arrive back as if nothing had happened. In fact, they were just hoping that one day they'd go to a bar and see a band playing at the bar, and he would be the guy there playing away, singing into a microphone, and he was just doing his own thing. But that all came to an end in 2015. That summer, the Maddux family finally got some answers about what happened to missing Joshua, but these are the kind of answers that just give you some more goddamn questions. Ones we still have today. On August 7th, 2015, a construction crew was working down at the old Thunderhead Ranch, roughly a quarter mile down the road from the Maddux's home. The main house on that site had been restored in 2013, but now on that site also was an old cabin, kind of at the rear of the ranch, and so they're like, listen, that's got to go. The cabin had been used as a rental property up until around 2005, but it had been abandoned ever since. The building was in rough shape and showed the wear and tear, complete with rats and rot. In spite of the demo crews already here, like down there, expectations about what kind of shithole this place would be, even their expectations, well, they weren't expecting the smell, the smell coming from the cabin. It was that kind of unmistakable smell, and so the owner of the property of this ranch, a fellow named Chuck Murphy, he decided to investigate. It was more of a smell than just dead rats or something or chipmunks or something. This was like something bigger. And looking further into this old cabin, he found, wedged inside the chimney, the partially mummified corpse of 18-year-old Joshua Maddux. The body was upside down and in the fetal position, with a hand over the face. The knees were right above the head, but the skeletonized legs were separated from the rest of the body. The body was dental records that would eventually confirm it to be certainly Joshua Maddux in a chimney just a couple of blocks from home. The entire time his family had been looking for him. I mean, you could practically see this cabin from the Maddux house.
I had a hard story to tell, but it ends with a Southern Colorado family finally getting closure. The remains of a teenager missing for the last 7 years have been found.
Joshua Maddux was 18 when he vanished in May of 2008. His remains were found in a cabin chimney that was torn down last month. The cabin was empty, and his family thinks he was looking for a place to hang out.
It's not what we wanted, obviously. We wanted him to come home, but at least now we can stop looking.
For 7 years, Joshua Maddux's family was left wondering.
All these mixed feelings, because we did hold out a lot of hope.
His sister Ruth says Josh left one day and never said why.
The cabin at Thunderhead Ranch had been in the hands of the Murphy family for over 60 years, since 1950. Chuck's brother had lived there for almost 30 years before leaving it to fall into ruin in 2005. Since then, Chuck would drop in occasionally just to check the place was secure. From time to time there would be the odd break-in or vandal, but nothing really serious. He'd noticed the smell a long time ago, but given the mice and chipmunks running around freely, he didn't really, think too much of it. So why would he be in the cabin? More specifically, why would he be inside, the chimney? Well, Joshua's cause of death would eventually be ruled to be an accident. That Joshua had, for some reason, decided to get into the chimney and climb down Santa Claus style. Down the chimney, but there had been a wood stove burner at the bottom, so he hadn't been able to get out once he reached the bottom of the chimney and had simply been stuck there. Maybe he had tried to move around to get back up, and that's why he was in the fetal position, but he hadn't, and slowly he died in there. It had not been it was a horrible way to go. When he realized he wouldn't have been able to get down through the chimney due to the wood burner there, well, there was no way back up, and it was either hypothermia or dehydration that ended his life. The coroner would say there was no signs of violence on his body like that. Either way, it probably would have been a couple of days before he passed away. But booty. When Chuck Murphy, the owner of the cabin, he heard about the coroner's deductions, he was a bit, are you sure? He had been the one to find the body of Joshua, and ever since he'd been like, when's the sheriff or whatever gonna ring me and talk about a criminal investigation? Because there's something smells, worse than what other people were smelling. Something smells awful here. Chuck could not understand when it was ruled as an accident, no investigation necessary. To him, not only was the scene suspicious as all heck, well, Chuck also had other information that the police just seemed to kind of discount about the state the cabin was in. Well, for a start, Chuck could think of no reason why he would be in the chimney. Chuck was familiar with people, like this was an old kind of abandoned, spooky cabin in the woods. And Chuck was familiar seeing people break through windows and break through doors to get in and vandalize the place. So if Joshua had wanted to get into the cabin, he could have. Through much, easier ways than trying to climb through a chimney. Josh was skinny enough, but like barely that skinny, and if he wanted to get in so badly, there's many other ways to get in. Secondly, there was the little detail of the chimney being blocked at both ends. So how would Josh have even gotten into the chimney in the first place? According to Chuck, the top of the chimney was blocked. Now, in some interviews, he says it was just like chicken wire. Other times, he says it's a full-on like rebar, like steel bars have been placed there. But either way, he would say it was impossible for somebody to get into the chimney via the top. So how did he get in there in the first place? And Chuck insists that it had been blocked. The demo crew had been sent in there initially to get all the metal scrap that they could out of the place first. Several of Chuck's contractors agreed there had been a heavy metal bar on top of the chimney, so he couldn't have gotten down that way. And obviously I know what you're thinking, Josh had been missing for a long time, but no, Chuck would say it had been there when he went missing. It had been there long enough. For what it's worth, Chuck Murphy always says there's something more here. This does not make sense how he got in there. Now, of course, though, the police investigators say no, it's an accident. If there had been a bar there, like it had been removed by the time his body had been found due to the demo crew. But they say, even if he could have moved it. Joshua could have just simply moved the bar and gotten in that way. Though if it's like a kind of put in bars, maybe. Okay, so that's kind of one issue. Another issue then is, the clothing that Joshua was wearing when he climbed down the chimney. If he climbed down the chimney of his own accord. Joshua was found wearing a t-shirt, which is fine. He was completely naked though. Other than the t-shirt, he was absolutely butt naked. The rest of his clothes was found inside the cabin. Now, some of the contractors who had gone in there and been kind of the first people to discover him, or at least sense the smell, they kind of differ in their accounts. Some people say the clothes was just thrown on the floor. Other people say it was neatly folded. However, unfortunately, it wasn't a crime scene at the time, so the clothes had just been thrown out. Either way, how would the clothes have gotten there if Joshua had been in the chimney? Now, you could also say, well, Joshua had been in the chimney, he'd gotten stuck, he'd taken off his clothes, and then thrown them down the chimney, but the bottom of the chimney was blocked with a wood burner stove, so they couldn't have gotten inside the cabin. There was something blocking the entrance to the chimney. A lot of the questions about what happened to Joshua only make sense if there had been a second person there. Other than the clothes, the coroner's report made it explicit there was no signs of Joshua being in a fight, no defensive injuries. In fact, no injuries at all. Did someone have a weapon, a gun, enough to frighten Joshua into following their instructions without a fight? Was Joshua scared of this person enough to get into the chimney? Had Joshua been naked because he had met somebody in the cabin? Maybe there had been something sexual going on there, and then this person forced Joshua to climb into a chimney, therefore essentially murdering them? Had Joshua been in the chimney and case of paradoxical undressing, when you get hypothermia and you feel like you're burning hot, so he'd begun to take all his clothes off. He was still wearing his t-shirt. Maybe there was more to the mysterious death of Joshua Maddux. In a post on a good old Reddit, written in 2015, there was a person who claimed to have gone to school with Joshua. And they wrote that shortly before Joshua mysteriously disappeared, well, he just made a new friend. A friend named Andy. This is believed to be Andrew Richard Newman. This guy is sort of bad news, and it's just interesting that Joshua made friends with a person who would be bad news and then he just vanished. Andy had allegedly been telling people at school that himself and Joshua were planning a trip to New Mexico together. Soon after Joshua went missing, Andy had told people at school that he had, quote, put Josh in a hole. The thing that throws weight behind these claims is that Andrew did in fact go, and he kind of sort of killed somebody there. Well, allegedly, killed somebody there. So, done it once, maybe he did it before. He stabbed and killed a disabled man and went on the run, finally being caught in Texas months later. He freely admitted to the stabbing, plus an unsolved robbery in Washington. He also claimed to have murdered a woman in Taos, New Mexico, but police already had a suspect in that murder and chose to charge him for the disabled murder instead. Andy Newman had a long rap sheet, and rumors about him had been rife while living in Woodland Park, Colorado, and he certainly seemed to be capable. As of today, however, Andy Newman is a free man. Allegedly, he stabbed this disabled person in New Mexico, and he admitted to it. But the only witness to him doing the stabbing, he died. He died separately in a bar fight, so there was never really enough to convict him of doing it. Many of Joshua's friends, though, and people who kind of in the know about this case have lobbied for the police to reopen it and reinvestigate Newman's possible involvement. So was he. Perhaps others involved in forcing Joshua at gunpoint. Had Joshua been, under the influence of drugs? Forced under the influence of drugs and then forced into the chimney? A lot of unanswered questions in the horrifying case of Joshua Maddux being found in a chimney. A lot of these horrifying discoveries, they kind of start out kind of innocently. Okay, well, innocently is probably the wrong word, but unassumingly, and then they're found in the most horrifying of circumstances. Like, okay, here's one, I said I wanted to do 3, but here's one quick story as well about another horrifying discovery. This was the disappearance of Larry Murillo-moncada. He was a young man who lived in Council Bluffs, Iowa, who was only 25 years of age. He was originally from Honduras and had been working at the No Frills supermarket in Council Bluffs. He had been working there for 5 years and he loved it. Larry was believed to have his own intellectual disabilities, but he loved working at this supermarket. It was his safe space, if you know what I mean. He loved his co-workers. He loved the customers. Just really liked the supermarket. So, when Larry went missing, the supermarket where he worked was where they went to first. See, Larry had been experiencing a severe bout of paranoia when one day he ran out the door without a coat or shoes after he got into a fight with his parents after finishing his work shift Thanksgiving 2009. He went out into that ice-cold Iowa winter, barely wearing anything, on a pitch-dark night, November 28, 2009. See, he had just been prescribed some new medication, and it wasn't helping, it sounds like. So his family, they went looking for him, immediately knowing, well, not really knowing what he was going through. But Larry just vanished. They could not find him anywhere. They searched the entirety of Council Bluffs. Nothing. They went to the No Frills supermarket where he worked, where it's believed it was his safe space. They couldn't find him there. They asked them, his co-workers and the employees there hadn't seen him. The search would go on for days and then weeks and finally years, with Larry just vanishing into a winter's night. Council Bluffs coming up actually seems to come up quite often because a lot of stories, like Robert Benrhodes was from Council Bluffs, Iowa, so a lot of weird shit happens there, and this story adds to that ever-expanding list. See, Larry hadn't taken his car, he wasn't even wearing his socks, and his family knew he was not in his right state of mind due to his mental illness and the medication. So his family, they kept coming back to the No Frills supermarket. They kept thinking, he will appear here. We just feel it. He's gonna come. If he's gonna go anywhere, if he's distraught, he will come here. They kept on returning. Haven't seen him. They'd return again the next day. No, he's not here. And time would pass. A lot of time. 7 years after Larry vanished, now we're talking 2016, the No Frills supermarket in Council Bluffs, it actually shut its doors for the final time. It was shut down. Even then, his family would still regularly go out of their way to drive past this now closed down supermarket just in case he would be standing outside waiting for them, waiting for his shift to begin. Every time though, they rubbernecked and they were disappointed. But then in 2019, the building was finally due to be emptied. They were going to renovate it for something else. Builders came back in and they were removing everything from this supermarket, including the giant freezers that were at the very back of the building. Now, these were the huge freezers they would use for stock. They weren't in like the customer area of the supermarket. These were in like, the back rooms, the storage areas, the stock rooms of the supermarket. And as they were removing one, just like in the other stories, didn't they just get a smell? Behind this one freezer, in an 18-inch gap between the freezer and the wall, they found a mummified body. It was Larry. He had been there for almost 10 years. That explained why customers had been for a long time complaining about a bad smell in the supermarket. Larry had, for some reason, come into his safe space. He'd come in there when he wasn't due to work, but as I said, his safe space, he just wanted to come in there, be there. And he had, for some reason, climbed behind this freezer. He'd fallen down there. He'd gotten stuck down there. And the freezers were so loud that nobody could hear his screams. The freezer being so loud, he couldn't be heard. And the freezer being so cold, it kept him mummified. And his parents had been right the entire time. He had been there.
I was informed that employees would randomly go up at different times and be up on the unit. And we believe that he may have accidentally fell behind the unit. The mother, she kind of had an idea that he had never left the No Frills. I don't know how she came up with that idea, but you know, they were pretty upset.
How he ended up in there, no one knows, and how the store didn't notice him or search there or anything remains kind of a mystery. The store owners and the employees at the store were questioned numerous times, but allegedly the authorities have been met with a wall of silence. And again, kind of like Joshua Maddux and, Robert Hornbeck, another story of a horrific way to go, and the horrifying discovery at the back of the freezer, in the air conditioner, in the chimney. And finally, this one last story I have for you today isn't about the horrifying discovery of where exactly it was made. Well, actually it is. I take that back. It's not really, though, in what he was found. It was how far away he was found, which also, like all these other stories, does not make sense. See, the story of David Glenn Lewis only begins with his baffling disappearance. David Glenn Lewis was a Texan, and he had attended Texas Tech and gotten himself one of those degrees in political science. Then didn't he go get some more of those degrees and began practicing as an attorney? You'd think with all these degrees he'd be done practicing, getting ready to actually work. But here, listen. I don't know. It was in 1993 that David was finally working in that jewel of northern Texas, the city they call Amarillo. David, he had himself a wife named Karen. They had been married for about 12 years come 1993. He had a young daughter named Lauren, who was the light of their lives. David was a Boy Scout leader, a Sunday school teacher. He was one of those guys who was, really involved in the community, volunteering, charity. Folks, you know the drill. The worst curses he would say would be heck and gosh dang it. And he wouldn't even call them curses. He would say cuss words. And you know what all that means. He's got something to hide. Let's find out what it is. Well, first of all, let's find him, because he mysteriously vanished on Super Bowl weekend of 1993. It was on January 28th, though, a couple of days before the Super Bowl, that the story begins. So it was Thursday, January 28th, 1993. That day, 39-year-old David Glenn Lewis, he was in work in his private practice, and he kind of, my tummy. He has a tummy bug. He decides to leave work early. Later on that day, that Thursday evening though, he goes to teach a class at a local community college. The very next day is a Friday. His wife Karen and his daughter Lauren are heading into Dallas. They're going to do some shopping, visit some family. They'll be back in a couple of days. All good. However, when his wife and daughter return home late on Super Bowl Sunday, they arrive to their house just outside of Amarillo, and the house is empty. It's empty of David, but it's not empty of weird signs, if that makes sense. The TV is on. The Super Bowl is over, or almost over, but the VCR is recording it. Now, weirdly enough, the VCR was one of those ones you couldn't just automatically set it to record. You had to manually press record. So therefore, he must have been here just a couple of hours previous. It was very strange, though. It was the Cowboys-Bills Super Bowl. He was a diehard Dallas Cowboys, America's team fan. So they were like, wait, this is weird, it's not here. There were sandwiches in the fridge, as if he had been, getting ready to settle himself in for the big game. They thought maybe he's gone to a neighbor's or friends to watch it there, but he hadn't. He was missing. The very next Monday morning, he was reported missing to the Amarillo police. And then, David's activities while his wife and daughter were away came to light. What he had been doing over the weekend and the previous couple of days made this case a hell of a lot stranger, folks. Stranger danger. So he left work early on Thursday because he said he was feeling unwell. He taught his college class that evening. The next day, the Friday, his wife and his daughter, they leave town. That same Friday, however, David was spotted at the Amarillo airport. They have a small local airport there. A fellow churchgoer said they believed they'd seen him at the airport, but he looked anxious, hurried, like he was in a rush through the airport, meeting somebody there, going somewhere. We don't know. But he was at the airport. Then later on that same Friday, David's car was seen parked outside the courthouse. Then it reappeared outside David's home. Then the next day it was outside the courthouse again. So it was like David had gone to the airport, was going to the courthouse. It seemed like... let's keep going. On the Super Bowl Sunday morning, the car was once again outside the courthouse, and a man saw David photographing his own vehicle. Then later on that Super Bowl Sunday, his wife and daughter come home, and he's gone, but it seemed like he had just left. His car was later found outside the courthouse, once again, the keys hidden under the floor mat, and his ID, credit cards, all of that. inside the car. Very strange. And then later on, a taxi driver would come forward and say he believed he had driven a man who looked a lot like David to the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. This was on the Monday, February 1st, after the Super Bowl. He said this guy once again seemed nervous, seemed anxious, and he paid for the cab with a wad of $100 bills, cash only, this fella. Although he'd left his credit card back at the car. But yeah, weird. And that was it. So David seemed anxious and nervous about something. Was going to the airport, to the courthouse, to home, to the courthouse, to home, to the big airport in Dallas, as if he was trying to meet somebody, trying to meet people, or on the run from people. And David, of course, local attorney, I'm sure his clients were only too chuffed that he had gone missing, and now so their cases were probably in the dust. He was also the assistant county attorney, so he would have dealt with a lot of cases, including criminal cases, in the area, and Karen had reported to police that he had received death threats before due to his involvement. Maybe he had been on the run, somebody he had put away, or somebody he had defended who was not happy with how David worked had gone after him. David was also a defendant in a suit brought against him and a couple of other attorneys around the time of his disappearance. Maybe that had worried him, but it wasn't believed that was like a serious one. It wasn't like a criminal case or anything like that. On January 30th, which is the final day he was definitively seen, the day before Super Bowl Sunday, somebody had deposited $5,000 into his bank account and also purchased a plane ticket in his name from Amarillo to Dallas. If that ticket was used, we don't know. Essentially, if he had actually flown from Amarillo to Dallas. And then later on, another ticket was bought in his name from LA to Dallas. Once again, we don't know if that ticket was used. We don't even know if he bought them. Now, friends and family did not believe that David had disappeared of his own volition. I mean, there are reports of people who've seen him and how he was acting seems very erratic and very strange, as if he was panicked, worried about something. People believe either he ran away because someone or something was after him, or he had been kidnapped due to some case maybe he had been involved in. However, the police, of course, they don't believe that. They believe he disappeared of his own volition. They put that down to two things. One was that he had bought a plane ticket. So kind of there you go. He had been planning on leaving and he had bought a plane ticket and he had left. Also, his wedding ring and his watch were found at home. Things he would have left behind, if he knew he was going to go away. But David Glenn Lewis's disappearance is only one mystery. We have two. It was in 2003 that a Washington State Patrol detective named Pat Ditter was working on identifying some John Does from the Yakima area. Genuinely good work, helping to give names to those who have none, closing cases, giving families peace. And he would to the Lewis family. Though in doing so opened just kind of a whole other little can of worms, let me tell you. See, he was trying to identify a John Doe who had died in the Yakima area all the way back in 1993, the same year David went missing. And as he was going through, he was investigating old newspaper records, trying to just see if he can match who this John Doe is. He eventually came across the story of missing David Glenn Lewis. He looked at the picture of David Glenn Lewis, looked at the photo they had of the John Doe, and he said, that's him. That's gotta be him. Same guy. He eventually reached out to the Amarillo Police Department, and yeah, DNA tests were done. It was David Glenn Lewis. He had been found. Over a decade after he went missing. Found on the opposite side of the country, 1,600 miles away from where he disappeared. And how he was found dead in Yakima made no sense. What they knew was that at 10:30 p.m. on February 1st, 1993, near the town of Moxie, close to Yakima, passing drivers saw a strange man walking along the side of the road. He seemed out of it, disoriented, and so one passing motorist drove past them, but then turned around to see if he needed some help. A dark winter's night, this guy walking along the side of the road, stumbling, something bad could easily happen to him. And something bad did easily happen to him. When this driver drove, turned around and got back to him, by the time they did, he was a body in the middle of the road. He had been hit. It had been a hit and run. He was dead. They called the police, they arrived and pronounced him dead there and then. He was wearing military-style clothing, like fatigues or something, and heavy boots. He wasn't wearing glasses, which David needed to see, but he did have some on him. Neither drugs nor alcohol were found in his system, and the car that hit him, it was never found either. But of course this body was found with no identification on him, so he would remain a John Doe for a decade until he would finally be identified by Detective Ditter. How the hell did David Glenn Lewis end up here? He died a day after he had been in Amarillo, maybe watching the Super Bowl, maybe not. And David Glenn Lewis had no known family or connections in the Yakima area. So maybe he disappeared on the Sunday, he was found dead on the Monday night. 1,600 miles in between, that's a 24-25 hour drive, maybe even more back in the early 90s. So he didn't drive there from Amarillo to Yakima in that time frame. Had he flown there, had he used that ticket from Amarillo to Dallas and then flown from Dallas to Washington State, maybe. Then maybe using that other plane ticket, the one from LA back to Dallas, but he didn't make that plane ticket, he was found. I mean, okay, I gotta show you the maps because this makes no sense. Where he was found, Moxie, is truly in the middle of nowhere. Nowhere near Seattle Airport or near Spokane Airport, which he probably would have needed to fly into to be found where he was at the time he was. It's so far away and he was found like within a day of him disappearing. And then even how he disappeared made no sense. The VCR in his home must have been manually activated to record the Super Bowl. When his wife and daughter returned home that night, they said the VCR was still recording. So therefore it couldn't have been on for that long, right? Because the tape would have ran out if it had been recording all day. The Super Bowl started at 5:30 p.m. So maybe he must have been there to press record at 5:30 p.m. And then he pressed record, he immediately leaves, gets on a plane from Amarillo to Dallas, from Dallas to Seattle, or probably Seattle. But then it's another 2 hours to Moxie. And why was he in Moxie? As you can see on the map, Moxie is in the downtown middle of nowhere, Washington. Maybe that cab driver was right. On the Monday morning, he had driven David Glenn Lewis to Dallas Airport and he had flown there. The cab driver said he was weird, he was nervous, he had a big wad of cash on him. He had flown from Dallas and then died in Washington. Why was he wearing military-style clothing? Why was he wearing military-style boots? And why was he so far from anything or anyone or even any travel points? Why was he disoriented in the middle of the road, in the middle of nowhere? And hit and run. That car's never been found. Was he killed? Was he truly kidnapped by somebody who had dressed him in strange clothing? His wife would say he never wore that clothing like that before in his life. Listen here, folks, I haven't done Conspiracy Captain in a while, but this sounds like a weird government conspiracy with military and maybe David, as an attorney, had been investigating something a little too suspicious for liking of some nefarious bad boys, people doing something no good. Like all the cases in this video, there seems like there's more to this old one than meets the eye. It's very unsettling. Unsettling in the most possible way. So please, as always, let me know your thoughts on all of these cases in the comments down below. Because, well, I'm not going to be sleeping good tonight. Please don't go missing. Thank you so much for watching. It means the absolute world to me that you're here watching this whole video. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did when researching into each of these. Also, a huge thank you to MyHeritage for sponsoring this whole video. Please click the link down in the description and use code CHAPTER for free shipping. If you're looking for some more of That Chapter, please check out the That Chapter Patreon, where it's $2 a month. You get early access, ad-free, all videos. There's exclusive videos. There's a Patreon-only Discord right there. Please give it a go. Or the That Chapter podcast, which has a brand new episode out every single Monday morning, and it's all completely different stories what I tell here on the channel. But speaking of the channel, next video will be up in a couple of days, so look forward to that. But until then, please take care of each other. Please take care of yourselves, because I love you. Mike out.